Well, it's a great pleasure to be joined by my friend and parliamentary colleague, the Minister for Communications and the Arts, Paul Fletcher. Well, Facebook has refriended Australia, and Australian news will be restored to the Facebook platform. And Facebook has committed to entering into good faith negotiations with Australian news media businesses in seeking to reach agreements to pay for content. This follows a series of intensive negotiations with Facebook since their actions last Thursday. It's involved the Minister, the Prime Minister, the head of the ACCC, Treasury, and myself. We have agreed to make some clarifications to the code. When it comes to the designation process by the Treasurer of a particular digital platform, a 1-month notice period will be put in place. The Treasurer will also take into account not just the unequal bargaining position between the digital platform and the Australian news media businesses, but also the commercial deals that have been put in place and that digital platform's commitment to supporting public interest journalism in this country. Also, ahead of the formal arbitration process will be a period of up to 2 months for a mediation. There already is an up to 3-month period for a negotiation, and if that is not successful, then it moves to an up to 2-month period for mediation ahead of final offer arbitration. Absolutely critically, the code maintains its key measures. Namely, it's a mandatory code, a world-leading code. Secondly, it's based on two-way value exchange. And third, it involves a final offer arbitration mechanism. I want to thank Mark Zuckerberg for the constructive nature of the discussions that we have had over the course of recent days. It's been a difficult process, but these are really important issues. These are important issues because the purpose of the code and the purpose of the Morrison government's intentions of all along have been designed to sustain public interest journalism in this country. That's why we've sought to put this code in place. That is why the now Prime Minister, then the Treasurer, commissioned the ACCC to undertake this groundbreaking review a number of years ago. Thank you, Paul, for your involvement in this process. It's been great working with you. I'll hand it to you.
Well, thank you, Treasurer, and I'll just add a couple of points to what the Treasurer has said. The first is that the whole purpose of the mandatory code process has been to give a strong incentive to the digital platforms to do commercial deals with Australian news media businesses. It's an example of the negotiate arbitrate model, which is used in a range of ways within Australian competition law and policy. And these technical changes will further give a strong incentive for those commercial deals, building on what we've already seen announced as between Google and parties like Seven West, Nine Entertainment Limited, News Corp and The Guardian. The second point I'd simply highlight is the requirement in the legislation for the Treasurer to consider the extent to which commercial deals have been done before he makes a decision to designate will be important in terms of smaller and regional publishers. There's a mechanism there for a default offer for smaller and regional publishers, and of course the Treasurer will be able to have consideration to whether there are deals in place not just for the large publishers but also for those smaller and regional publishers. Treasurer.
Are there any questions?
Facebook has said that it retains the ability to decide if news appears on Facebook. So are we basically at back to stage one where Facebook is now saying we're going to negotiate with media companies, but we won't necessarily do a deal and we won't necessarily put their content on our website?
Well, let's just see what happens in coming days in respect to commercial deals. It's certainly the intention from Mark Zuckerberg, as he explained to me, was to do commercial deals. And they are pretty advanced with a number of parties. They were ahead of their actions last Thursday, and obviously that was interrupted. And now they have re-engaged with the parties. What we saw with Google, and that was a pretty protracted and difficult negotiation as well, but what we saw with Google were significant deals. Millions of dollars flowing to support public interest journalism in this country with a range of players. And we have also praised Google for their constructive discussions that we've had through this whole process. We spoke to Google ahead of today's announcement about some further changes, and Google's response was that these were sensible changes. So those deals remain in place between Google and their commercial partners. More deals no doubt will be struck. They include deals with not just the big players, as Paul mentioned, Nine, Seven, News Limited, but also some, and The Guardian, but also some of the smaller players as well. So Facebook is now going to engage in good faith negotiations with the commercial players, and our message from Paul and I to Australian news media businesses is no doubt to sit at that table and hopefully conclude the deals.
So under this model then, could it be that Facebook would do deals with some media organisations and show their content on its website, and those that it can't do deals with it just won't show?
Well, there's a non-discrimination clause, and that still remains in place. And you can't do deals with one party and not do deals with other parties and not be subject to the code. What we've made clear, though, is that the nature of those deals between the digital platform and the individual media business can be different. They may involve different products. They obviously may involve different sums of money. They may be for a different length of time. What we have seen to date with Google are longer term deals, and we hopefully will see similar longer term deals between Facebook and Australian media businesses.
What would anticipate that we're going to start seeing news about in our newsfeed?
Well, Mark Zuckerberg said to me today that that will occur in coming days. Obviously, that's a question for the engineers at Facebook, but certainly their commitment, both in their statement as well as in the words to me directly from Mark Zuckerberg, were that that news content will be restored to Facebook's Australian platform.
What if they can just flip a switch on that day like they did on Thursday?
Well, you may know more about the engineering details of such a program. I know that they've told me that it will happen in coming days.
What exactly did you have to give Facebook to make it change its mind? Was it just these amendments, or was there something else? What really convinced them? They were looking pretty strong for a number of days. And do you still consider Facebook's behaviour deplorable and bullying, or are you and Mark Zuckerberg on fantastic terms to be really friendly with each other? Or how do you want to say it?
Well, the fact of the matter is their behaviour last week was regrettable, and I expressed that very directly to Mark himself. I said, not only was the Australian government disappointed in what Facebook did, but we were disappointed in the way they did it, because we weren't given any advance notice. So clearly the government's made its feelings felt. No doubt Australians have made their feelings felt. But at the same time, our commitment to the code remained. And that is what we are now proceeding to pass through the Parliament, is the legislation to put in place a world-leading code, a code that has been the product of years of work.
These changes today, they just pave the way, don't they, for this world-leading code to be in place that ultimately neither platform is designated to comply with?
Well, there's no doubt that Australia has been a proxy battle for the world. I have no doubt that so many other countries are looking at what is happening here in Australia because of this innovative code that the Australian government, the Morrison government, is now pursuing. So Facebook and Google have not hidden the fact that they know that the eyes of the world are on Australia. And that's why they have sought, I think, to get a code here that is workable. Now, clearly, they would have loved to continue to provide their technological services into the Australian market without the code being in place. But as Paul and I know, we want Australian journalists who generate original content should be remunerated for that. And that has been the purpose of the code, and the commercial deals being struck between the parties has been a priority. And the code has been designed to encourage those deals, but obviously with a last resort, final offer arbitration model in the event that those deals are not reached.
Can I ask the Communications Minister
Sure.
for your first impressions of the digital disinformation and misinformation code released yesterday? And why did the government go for a mandatory approach when it came to securing revenue from the digital giants, but an opt-in approach when it came to misinformation? Is securing commercial revenue for news organisations more important than combating disinformation?
Well, the code that's been released to deal with misinformation and disinformation reflects a recommendation to the government of the ACCC Digital Platforms Inquiry. In fact, we've been working across a number of those recommendations. That very substantial report commissioned by the Prime Minister when he was Treasurer, several hundred pages, extremely detailed work done by our competition regulator. It had recommendations in a range of areas. And we've been pursuing a number of those. One of those, and we worked on this throughout last year, was in relation to this code to deal with misinformation. And consistent with the recommendation of the ACCC, it is a voluntary code. We've made it plain that we will review the performance. In fact, the Australian Communications and Media Authority will report to me by the middle of the year on performance. We've also made it plain, if we don't see that code working, we'll certainly consider other measures.
So if Facebook is to avoid coming under the code, will it have to do deals with all the major media organisations? Like how broad is this non-discrimination clause?
Well, we've made it very clear that they need to do commercial deals with Australian media businesses. Now, the decision on designation is one for the Treasurer. It will be one based on advice. It will be a two-tiered test, effectively. The unequal bargaining position of the respective parties, bearing in mind that was the reason why we said very early on that this code was to apply to Facebook and Google, and we didn't go into details about some of the other digital platforms that are available. The other tier to the test is the commercial deals that are being put in place. And we have obviously spoken in the past before about a default offer being available to some of the smaller players. And we would encourage the digital platforms, both Google and Facebook, to enter into these good faith negotiations, as we've seen to date from Google, and to conclude those agreements. And I know that having spoken to Facebook multiple times today, that is their intention.
Will the government reallocate funding back into Facebook for the vaccination information campaign? You said earlier this week that funding was going to be reallocated out of it.
Yeah.
What Facebook's done. Is that money going directly back?
The government is looking to bring back its advertising onto Facebook, and obviously that is a welcome development, but so is today's news, where Facebook has refriended Australia. Thank you.